first told the theme of today's talks, I just assumed we were supposed to talk about the negative reputation of the millennial generation. I just knew I was going to have to stand up here and defend my generation and talk about all the troubles that we face every day and what it's like to be a 20-something in today's society. But when I was given the true theme of today's talk, I couldn't help but think about how special we are. We are the personification of the hopes and dreams and hard work of our grandparents and parents. We have been encouraged to take advantage of every opportunity given to us because we have so many more available to us than any other generation before us, especially with regards to education. I work as an admissions counselor, which means I get to spend a great deal of time in high schools talking to students about continuing their education past high school. I've learned quickly in my short time in education that not every student is given the same opportunities as I was. And not only that, not every student is even encouraged to seek out those opportunities. We as millennials owe it to the next generation to encourage and empower the upcoming generations to be the best that they can be, just as we were encouraged by our parents and grandparents and the generations before us. We have to pay it forward. I was born to a single teen mom who had this fearlessness and determination about her that forced her to make the most out of every situation that life threw her way. She always believed in my brothers and I owe her the world for that. I went to a very suburban high school that was not very diverse, and I will say there were many times that I didn't feel as if I was as smart or as good as my peers. But my mom would offset these insecurities by exposing my brothers and I to museums, cultural festivals, and different events to broaden our horizons and give us a broader perspective of the world around us. I didn't realize until later in life how important that was to me. She always believed in my brothers and I, and she always pushed us to be the best that we could be, and she always encouraged us to go to college. She always believed that we would go to college, or at least she made us feel that she did. I will say, though, that her encouragement and empowerment really pushed me to be confident and made me feel like I was just as smart as the people in my classes. I must say that although I talk about college and how important it is to be successful in education, I wasn't accepted to college when I first applied. My SAT score was so low that I don't think I would have been accepted back into high school if I reapplied. My mom was concerned. We talked about my options. It was really awkward. So I went to my guidance counselor in high school, and she encouraged me to take a free SAT prep course, and my score went up exponentially. I called the admissions office at my dream school and asked for my application to be reevaluated with my shiny new test scores. I was accepted to college over the phone that day. I will never forget the sense of pride and accomplishment I felt the day I was accepted to college. That is the feeling that gets me up in the morning every day to go to work. And I take a lot of pride in being able to give students that feeling every day. All students deserve that feeling. And we as millennials can pass that feeling along, and it doesn't take much. One of my favorite parts of working in admissions is that I get to engage with students on many different levels and in many different ways. I spent my first year of college really trying to find my niche. And at a large school with over 28,000 students, I wanted to find a way that I could make an impact, and I secured a job as an orientation assistant my freshman year. I was so excited to be able to usher students from high school into their freshman year, and I was even more excited to spread school spirit all around our campus. One of the professionals working with working with orientation that year was an admissions professional named Chris. Chris was respected all over campus due to his immense amount of school spirit, and he was highly respected. Chris saw something in me that I had yet to discover in myself, and he encouraged me to apply to be a tour guide on campus. I am not sure what he saw in me, but I am so glad that he encouraged me to seek out that job, because being a tour guide in college is what's led me into the job that I'm in today. I am so happy that I had people like Chris in my life to push me. But I will say it took a little bit of my own kind of push as well. I applied to be an intern in the admissions office after I graduated, and ironically enough, my two supervisors were going to be Chris and the lady who accepted me over the phone 4 years prior. which was kind of awesome. Her name was Jenny, and Chris and Jenny were best friends. I was supposed to start my first big girl job on a Wednesday in July of 2011. The Sunday before I was supposed to start, I received a phone call that Chris had been tragically killed in a car accident and was no longer with us. I was devastated. The person who pushed me to really aspire for greatness and to work in higher education was no longer going to be able to work with me, and I was not going to be able to make him proud. So I knew at that moment that I really needed to work hard because I owed it to him. There was a memorial service for Chris on campus, and the room overflowed with hundreds of students who owed their success to Chris, who applied to college because Chris pushed them to do so. And I knew at that moment that just by being himself, he inspired so many people to be the best that they could be. And I knew that I could do the same thing. And again, I owed him that. I knew that if it weren't for people like my mom, Jenny, and Chris, I would not be where I am today. I love the opportunity that I get to engage with many students on a daily basis. And a couple of years ago, I was invited to do an admissions simulation at a very prestigious private high school. I was really excited because I was going to be paired with an admissions counselor from a very competitive institution, and I was selfishly excited because I knew I was going to get to know a little bit about their process so that I could better serve students in the future. An admissions simulation is a program where students get the opportunity to read mock applications and make a decision on them as if they were admissions counselors. This gives them the opportunity to gain insight as to how their applications will be read in the future so that they can better prepare for the admissions process. The group we were matched up with was about 30 students, and it was not very diverse. There were only about 2 brown students in the room, and I couldn't help but pay more and more attention to them as we delved deeper into the applications because I could empathize with them. I knew what it was like to be underrepresented in many of my classes when it comes to race and sometimes tax bracket, so I couldn't help but relate to these students. We had gotten to the point in the admissions simulation where we were talking about what makes each application stand out and what students can do to make their application stand out in the future. I was so proud to see that these students pointed out things like extracurricular activities, course rigor, and letters of recommendation. I was even more proud to see that none of the students pointed out that one of the applicants was Black. I was quickly awakened from that fantasy when the other counselor said, "Did no one notice that application number 2 was African American?" My eyes shot to those 2 students in the room as defeat wiped over their faces. They were completely singled out, indirectly, just for that comment. She went on to say, "It says here that she attends a private high school, and we can only assume that she's one of the few at her school. She should have talked about that in her essay. That would have made her application stand out." At that moment, those students were told what their narrative was. They weren't encouraged to be individuals and seek out opportunities outside of the classroom. I was furious. After that, there was a mini college fair, and I made a point to seek out those students' parents to apologize for what had happened. But I was quickly relieved to see that the parents were not very surprised. And they reassured me that they encouraged their students to be unique and to be individuals and to work hard just like every other student. Unfortunately, not every student is encouraged that way. And it's up to us as millennials to encourage students to be their best selves, because there are many students out there that, if just given the opportunity, could go on to do great things. They just need that push. I received an application from a student last year that will forever hold a place in my heart. She attended a school in Charlotte where 100% of the population received free or reduced lunch. Out of 400 students in her class, she was number 2. And as more I delved into her application, the more I realized how special she was. But although her grades were very high and she was involved in extracurricular activities, she pursued internships, she volunteered, her test scores were very low. And as a public school, we have to adhere to certain criteria with regards to test scores and grades to receive funding for the next year. So that put me in a bind. I called her guidance department to see if there were any other test scores that she could provide that she hadn't sent to us, but unfortunately, those are the only scores we had on file. Then the counselor said something to me that I hardly ever hear, especially in a school system with counselors who have over 100 students on their caseload. He said, if there's anything I can do to help this student, to let me know. She was so special. When I read her application, my heartstrings were tugged at in ways that I've never, ever experienced. When this student was 2 years old, her mother decided to give her up because she struggled with addiction and taking care of a toddler was too much to bear. She was then taken care of by her father, who throughout her childhood was in and out of prison. When she was 7 years old, her grandmother was murdered. And by the time she got to sophomore year of high school, she was diagnosed with brain cancer and had to undergo a series of surgeries and massive amounts of therapy. But at the end of her essay, she said that she knew education was the only way she knew how to change her circumstances. And if it weren't for teachers and counselors and people in her community who encouraged her, she wouldn't be able to make it. I presented her application to my boss and pleaded her case. Not only did we admit her to UNC Asheville, but we offered her a scholarship to encourage her to continue her education and to be the best that she can be. We cannot imagine some of the environments that these students are coming from in their home or in their communities. So we owe it to them as community members and as millennials to pass on a sense of encouragement and a sense of empowerment so that they can be the best that they can be. I have been humbled to tears by students over the years. And one time in particular, I got to speak to an auditorium full of over 100 students in a rural school in eastern North Carolina. We talked about simple things, what it takes to apply to college, good grades, test scores. We talked about seeking out financial aid through the FAFSA, application deadlines, and the importance of making yourself stand out. The same spiel that I give students on a daily basis. They even laughed at my corny jokes, which at this point in my life, if a high schooler thinks I'm cool, I feel like I'm doing something right. But at the end of my spiel, a girl raised her hand and just said, thank you. And I will say, at first I thought she was just trying to look good in front of her peers and hopefully that her application would be read favorably in the future. But she went on to say, in this county, after high school, most people get pregnant and work here for the rest of their lives. And I know that's okay. But you took the time to explain college to us like it was realistic, and nobody's ever done that for us before. After she said that, everyone in the room echoed thank yous, and I couldn't help but feel special. I was speechless. How could I impact a student's belief in themselves to pursue a college education? When I got to my car, I could not help but cry, and of course, I was glad I had no more schools that day because my makeup was ruined, but I realized that just by encouraging a student, you could change their perception of who they are and what they do in the future. It doesn't take much. We can't imagine where these students are coming from on a daily basis. Not every student gets the same encouragement that we received as millennials, and we are tasked with passing that along to students for the future. I've learned in my short 5 years in education that sometimes we assume that somebody else is encouraging that kid. Somebody else is pushing them. They're getting it at home, or they have great teachers. I don't have to say anything. They know they're great. We owe it to the next generation to push them. And a simple "you can do it" can go a very, very long way. Thank you.